Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to staying with us for this session. We will try to keep it on time. Thank you very much for sitting. So I'm very excited to introduce our next panel on Beyond GDP, New Measures and Narratives. The first panelist is online, Sandrine Dixson-Declève. She was online before. I hope, Sandrine, if you're there, you can speak.
I am here.
Oh, wonderful. We cannot see you.
Oh,
yes, we can see you now. Hi, Sandrine.
Okay.
So I'll just quickly introduce the panel, and then we will go through to get the contribution from each of them. Our first speaker is Sandrine Dixson-Declève. Sandrine is honorary professor and global ambassador at the Club of Rome and executive chair at Earth for All. Our second contribution will be from Enrico Giovannini. Enrico is professor of economic statistics and sustainable development at the University of Roma Tor Vergata, here where we are now, and scientific director of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. The third contribution is from Robert Costanza, professor of ecological economics at the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL in London. Finally, we have Mario Biggeri, professor of applied economics at the University of Florence. And now here we are all, and I'll pass it over to Sandrine. Thank you very much, Sandrine, for joining us online. I will prompt you with a question, and then you're free to elaborate. So for around 6 to 8 minutes. So each of the panelists will have a contribution of around 6 to 8 minutes, and then we will open it to the floor. So my prompt is, Sandrine, how can we shift narratives to go beyond the GDP and embrace a new vision of development that is centered on the people and the planet? Over to you.
So thank you very much for that fundamental question. And I wish that Enrico could actually open up and lead us through some of the incredible work that he's been doing at the institutional level and at the UN level. But let me take you into some thinking that we've been doing since the publication of the Limits to Growth and the last 50 years of thinking through not only new indicators, but new ways of being within the operating space of the planetary boundaries. I think we need to think about a systemic transition, and we have to shift to viewing economic growth as the ultimate goal, to treating it as a tool for enhancing human and planetary well-being, and to think through different ways of growing. I think that successful shift involves redefining progress, of course, through a multidimensional lens. We've seen that the UNDP has come out with its Human Development Report showing that for the first time ever, we're actually not progressing as a human species. And for me, that's a distinct entry point into demonstrating that actually most countries are no longer offering a measure of how the economy can enhance the lives and livelihoods of people and planet. So there are key strategies that we need to implement. We need to continue to address metrics. It's absolutely fundamental that we do so. We need to understand what are the new metrics, the dashboards, and go beyond GDP, do GDP plus, but we need to cluster it. We need to make sure that we simplify and actually have these measures which are very clear. And I know that Bob will talk about some of the clustering work that has been done as well. We need to have those comprehensive dashboards that also the JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, has come up with. But we also then need to anchor it into thinking through how do we then embed those new narratives in policy. Some of the pushback that we've received directly in conversations with the highest level leaders, including President von der Leyen, for example, is when I talk about well-being, I feel like people think I'm taking you to the spa. I think it's very important that we somehow reframe sustainability, not as those that have well-being and it's only for the few, versus those that actually will continue to sacrifice or have a cost because we are moving into a very different type of growth. And what does that look like in today's world of also being focused on, at least from a Western perspective, on competitiveness, on security, and on resilience? How do we build in our desire to shift towards new well-being models or new economic models that enable us to go beyond GDP, and figure out how that means actually dealing with the blind spots and the elephants in the room, or even the black swans, as I say, that are very clearly bringing in chaos, conflict, an underbelly of total disruption coming from AI. What does that look like in our space? And how do we demonstrate that we actually can thrive, not only just survive the tech bro feudalism that is being placed upon us, but actually thrive in a very different way? And how do we also, as we're thinking about redefining prosperity and value, think about what are then the short-term levers within the existing system, and actually the long-term levers, the long-term planning, the long-term journey that we need to take people on in terms of the new systems that we want to create. To do that, if we think about not only narrative development, but anchoring the narrative development in both scientific, economic evidence, and in particular also social evidence and understanding of social tipping points and also social tension, we need to think about how we engage with today's population, not only civil society, not only those that are pushing back because they're feeling the pain of, exactly as I said, the UNDP report that we're no longer progressing, and that actually this is the first generation that is making less than its parents. It's engaging those disenfranchised part of our society who are really feeling the pain of a GDP or economic system that is actually not fostering their lives and livelihoods. It means that we also have to create a new type of dialogue with the youth, an intergenerational dialogue. And when I talk about the youth, it means understanding, again, some of those black swans, in particular the growth of populism in young male populations who are feeling completely disenfranchised, many pockets in Africa, but also in the United States. It means that we also have to strengthen data and technical capacity, but we have to also bring in sense making and learned experiencing of what it means now to live in the 21st century. And this really is the transformative shift that we need to talk about. And it's the redevelopment of narratives that are actually linked up to that transformative shift within the 21st century. So it's not just about replacing GDP with better indicators. It's not just adding well-being to policy dashboards. It's not even just pricing externalities that matter. It's really that deeper shift and understanding that we need a core new social contract. This is a little bit some of the work that we've been doing now in working for and with Olivier de Schutter, the poverty envoy for the UN, who's just come out with his eradication of poverty roadmap and looking towards new well-being models. It means that we need to understand the direct links that we've identified in Earth for All, which is looking at the relationship, the systemic relationship between poverty, inequality, empowerment, and some of the core provisioning systems that enable us to thrive, affordable and healthy, for example, food systems, energy systems, but also then the broader gamut of healthcare systems, financial systems, etc. So this means an absolute rethink in terms of the way in which we address beyond GDP. It means that we have to systematize it, but also integrate it in 21st century logic. And it means that we need to think through very clearly the current constraints that governments are under of knee-jerk reactions, in particular like deer in the headlights, to some of the immediate conflicts that they're seeing, and then their desire to actually move much more into neoliberal traditional ways of addressing the economy and addressing competitiveness. I don't know if my time is up. I can leave it at that, or I can always add more, but please let me know.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. I think we might leave it for now, but stay on with us because I'm sure there will be time for questions later, hopefully, and there we can have a follow-up. Thank you very much, Sandrine. Our next contribution is from Enrico Giovannini, and Enrico, I'm going to give you a prompt. How can we push UN member states to uptake the work of the UN high-level expert group on beyond GDP?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody and welcome to this fantastic university where I've been teaching over the last not so many years, but it's a great opportunity to be here. Years ago, Rutger Östra wrote a book, Beyond GDP by 2030. And so I'm asking myself whether the report that we published a few weeks ago as high-level group on Beyond GDP established by the UN Secretary General will allow finally to make Rutger happy. And I think that, of course, it not depends on us, it depends on the General Assembly that has to discuss our proposals, but I'm quite optimistic. But let's suppose for a second that all our proposals are implemented, okay? So by 2030, you will have all UN member countries establishing a national initiative on measuring equitable, inclusive, sustainable well-being, as we did in Italy at this point 15 years ago. Every single member country would have established this initiative, engaging civil society, academic experts on how to measure equitable, inclusive, sustainable well-being, well-being for today, well-being for tomorrow, starting from our proposals, but eventually adding other measures that better represent the situation of member countries. What if, according to our proposal, UN, starting in 2027, publishes every year a report on equitable, inclusive, sustainable well-being at world level? And what if the UN Secretary General pushes statistical offices to do what we propose to do, which means establish, because we didn't reach an agreement, establish a group to have a composite indicator based on our framework for all countries wider than the UNDP, or Human Development Indicator, and at the same time establishing a research team to start from scratch, building a new system of accounts focused on the well-being of people and the planet? What if statistical offices work to invest on what we call the nowcasting, which means flash estimates of variables that normally arrive very late. So they would be able to produce dashboards of indicators, not for GDP on the previous year, for other indicators 2-3 years ago, and so on. My first job at the Italian Statistical Office was to calculate quarterly GDP. And I can tell you that after calculating quarterly GDP, you can calculate quarterly whatever you wish, okay? I stop here just to tell you that the report, even if it's not fully satisfactory, we were discussing with Bob the mark, I would assign 7.5 out of 10. Just to tell you, also, we had huge discussions internally, but there are many other recommendations. If all the recommendations are implemented, could we say that we went beyond GDP by 2030? Then, of course, you can check, is the GDP included in our dashboard? And the answer is no. Are several indicators of technological developments and so on, including in our dashboard? The answer is no. Why? Because we recommend to focus on outcomes, outputs, and not on inputs. And this could change radically the discussion also in terms of policy making, model building, in order to be able to measure at the end in an integrated way, like the model used by Earth for All, but also the model that we use as Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. And if you are interested in more, you can check our report published on 6th May, where we simulate alternative policies and their impact on sustainable development indicators, sustainable development goals indicators. So now it depends on decision makers, policy makers, but also statistical decision makers, UN, and so on. Have we now fixed the problem? Have we really moved into a completely new world? It's long way after 20 years that I've been 25 years that I've been working on this issue. I can tell you, okay, don't be too enthusiastic, because there are a lot of blocking factors. For example, several countries, including some European countries, would say, now, based on GDP, I know that I'm the group of G7. Where I'm going to be on W7, well-being 7? Are you proposing to cancel GDP from any use? No, of course we are not proposing that. But how? I stop here just to tell you that there are several questions that have to be addressed in order to convince everybody that this is not a way to destroy economic theory or economic policy and so on. Last two remarks very quickly. The issue of composite indicators. I'm quite dissatisfied with the conclusion, because in the meantime, with JRC colleagues, we have developed, and you can check on the JRC website, we have developed for EU and US the indicator of equitable, sustainable and equitable well-being, and inclusive well-being, sorry. From 2011 to 2023, you can check the different dynamics. And I decided not to use slides, but I can show you the chart. And yes, it's like this. And this is EU, this is US. Okay? Using a framework which is very similar to what we proposed in the H leg. What does it mean? That EU is perfect and the US is lagging behind? Yes, but in the current well-being, EU is delivering much better results than US. But if you look at sustainable and inclusive well-being, and you take into account the US capacity of generating resources for future, well, the gap narrows down. It's just to say that as in the famous framework developed by Bob a few years ago, in 1980.
Seems like only yesterday.
Yes, seems like only yesterday. The amount of capitals, including economic capitals, is very important. So we cannot just dismiss. We are not talking about happy growth. We are talking a very complex system in which building the different forms of capital are important. But if you look at what JRC, we have done at JRC, you can see that it's already possible to build indicators that tell a completely different narrative about the comparison. And last word is in terms of frequency of data. As I said, I believe that a lot of statistical figures, of course, are based on models, are model-based data, and therefore it would be possible, through appropriate techniques, also to calculate quarterly well-being indicators in order to compete with quarterly GDP. Of course, research is needed. We are trying to do that at the JRC, but it's just to say that we have to go beyond the idea that GDP is observed, while all the other indicators are model-based. data. I was in charge of national accounts. GDP is not observed, doesn't exist in nature and in reality, is a statistical construct. 60 years of investment in terms of research, great results. Now we have to do the same also for other measures of what we decided to call equitable, inclusive, sustainable well-being, which is already a great way to go beyond GDP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrico, for your contribution. For those of us who were lucky enough to be Roma 3 yesterday, we had a deep dive into the work of the JRC and the dashboards and multidimensional indicators. It was like a marathon of 5 hours of multidimensional indices, so very, very interesting. Thank you. Our next contribution is by Bob Costanza. And our prompt is, how can we converge towards robust measurement frameworks of sustainable and inclusive well-being? Over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Enrico, for that. Oops, sorry. Oh, this is for the slides. Okay. Yeah, and I'm really encouraged, actually, by the convergence, the degree of consensus, I think, that's emerging on these topics after so long. And I think we are at a time now when that convergence is really needed to get us past this bottleneck, I think, that we're in, this poly crisis that we're talking about. I'll talk a little bit. I'm just going to have a couple of slides, and I'll go through them quite quickly. And talk a little bit about a project I'm involved with called Merge. That's actually the combination of these 4 sister projects that has that goal. How do we measure what matters? How do we build pathways toward this sustainable and inclusive well-being future? And you can see it includes a large consortia of partners, both in the policy, the academic community, and civil society, importantly. And I think that's one element that we need to focus on a lot more going forward. How do we engage the general public in this discussion? How do we get outside the policy academic bubble? Because I think this future is the future that most people want. But it's not clear to them. They don't. I don't think the public recognizes that there is a choice to be made. There are alternatives. And within that project, we've sort of recognized that these 4 elements are all interconnected. Our current system is really focused on the goal of GDP growth, and the other elements support that goal. The metrics support that, the GDP metrics. The underlying models of the economy and what it is support that goal. You know, the conventional IO approach, which only talks about marketed goods and services transitions, and the current system of national accounts. So these all are self-reinforcing technical and institutional systems that are hard to break. So just changing the metric by itself, if you don't change the other elements, especially if you don't change the goal, I think hasn't had any effect. So what we really need to do is change to a whole new regime. And the most fundamental part of that is to change the societal goal, to change the goal to sustainable and inclusive well-being. And I think that goal is becoming the shared goal, at least in the policy community. And once you've done that, I think the metrics then have to be metrics that support that goal. How do we measure progress toward that goal? Very different than the goal of GDP growth. And fundamentally, also, we need to have underlying models that capture the whole system, the things that do contribute to sustainable and inclusive well-being, and that can track progress both historically, in the present, and into the future, so that we can understand the implications of the policies that we're implementing and how well they at least are predicted to meet those societal goals. And finally, the elephant in the room, if you will, is, okay, well, how do we make that transition, given that the system on the left is embedded in so many institutions that are, we're locked into that system. We're addicted to that system, if you will. So it's going to take more than simply saying, yes, this is a good idea. We've been saying that for, I think, a long time, but progress has been slow. So we need something more to push that transition and to overcome that addiction to this system on the left. This group of us recently published a short comment in Nature that tries to summarize all of this and says, you know, what do we need to do? What are the ways forward in order to make this transition that by 2030 that Enrico was talking about? First and fundamentally, we have to embrace this goal of sustainable and inclusive well-being. I think that's a key element. Second, we have to agree on the well-being indicators. I think that's what we've been talking about, and I think there is growing agreement and consensus on what those indicators are, and we'll go into more detail on that in tomorrow's session. Third, I think we have to develop dynamic models that go beyond GDP, systems models that include both the natural system, the social system, and the economic system, and how they're all integrated together. So system dynamics models, and there's a lot of work going on in that regard as well, both at the JRC and as part of the MERGE project and associated projects. So I think we're making some progress there, and the Earth for All model is one of those. And finally, I think we have to treat the societal addictions. Why are we locked into the current system? And we've done some work looking at what works to overcome addictions at the individual scale, and can we use what we learn there at the societal scale. And it turns out that one important therapy focuses addicts on discussing their life goals and establishing what they're really trying to achieve with their life as a fundamental form of that will motivate the changes that they need to make. So I think it goes back to the first one of these. In order to really overcome this addiction, we first of all have to establish a shared goal for society. And like I said, we've done that, I think, or are doing that at the policy level and in academia, but we haven't really addressed the general public yet. So one thing we're doing now is we're holding a video contest to produce videos of alternative futures. How do we engage the general public in thinking about what the possible futures are, what life would be like in a sustainable and inclusive well-being future compared to what it would be like in a business-as-usual future. So this is an ongoing project. Hopefully we'll have some videos, short videos that will engage the public and get people to think about what this challenge could look like. And I think that's all I had in terms of slides, but I think that's one of the fundamental limitations that we have. How do we engage the public in this discussion? And I think ultimately it's going to take civil society and the academic and policy communities, working together to make the transitions that I think we need to achieve this to get well beyond GDP, if we can put it that way, by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob, and amazing to learn about the MERGE project. Our next contribution is from Mario, and Mario, my prompt is the following. How can societal actors all contribute together to a paradigmatic change to move beyond GDP?
Okay, thank you very much. So, first of all, let me share with you my happiness of being here with such scholar and with Sandrine. It's a very important occasion to be at this conference because what I'm trying to talk today is to see how this conference is going to introduce and part of this change, this idea of changing the narrative and how different actors can really make the difference. So this event has been supported by MERGE and also by our Festival on Sustainable Development. That is something that is so important to make people together, because this is what we need, really. There is something which I usually start, because this is what we are talking, what Bob was saying. To change the narrative, you need to understand what are the different parts that we want to work with. So this is very relevant. So on the top, you can see that we have the vision, public consensus, and we are going really in this direction. Although we start from different sources in spring, obviously we are going to enter in a very similar desire and aspiration to change this world and to change how we measure the progress, how we do model the progress. Then we have the development theories and hypotheses, and we have different development models and empirical application. This is all about what is in Renaissance we are talking about. And then we have the development policy and strategies that, as Bob was saying, they have to change. Plus, we have measurement. And now we are talking about measurement. But we understand that measurement is something very important, is relevant, but is not enough. We need to change all the different parts of this mosaic. And this is a compass that we have produced before merge in SPES. As Bob was saying, SPES was converging SPES was converging with other projects into merge, and the project is very strong merge because it's trying to construct guidelines for statistical offices and for the policymakers. This is a very important part of the process if we want to involve, as Julia was asking me. And you can see at the center there are several aspects. One is the SDGs pillars, where peace is at the center. Then the sustainable human development aspect, which is linked to the directionality. So if we talk about peace, we do not talk about militarization, but we talk about protection. We are going to talk about empowerment and solidarity. If we talk about prosperity, we are going to talk about productivity, but it's a productivity that doesn't go against peace, equity, empowerment, and participation, and so on. And then there are the 5 actors. Is the last here. Okay, that is going to create the compass that is moving somehow as very important. We are 5 main actors in social innovation. If you look at the quintuple helix model, we are the academia. The academia is very important. Here we are for that, but it's not enough. Business has to be with us, and the government have to be with us, plus the civil society have to be with us, and the nature. And the nature is so important that very often we forget to be part of it, but we are part of it. And agency is also for nature. So this is what we were saying, and somehow we were thinking within merge and SPES to cover all these aspects, and also the other high-level expert group beyond GDP is doing. And I like very much that the symbol looks very similar. But this is the political economy. The political economy is quite complex. So in a book that is made by editor by me and Andrea Ferranini is Navigate Transition to Sustainable Human Development, Frameworks, Evidence, Approach, and from Edward Elgar. So here you understand the complexity of this change. So it's true that we want to change the narrative of measurement, but we need to face several problems. Very often, why we have to be together? We need to be together, not just about different theories and having different type of consensus, as I was showing you before, but because it's not sufficient to have, as you can see in the bottom, those theoretical consensus, technical consensus, and different type of consensus in measuring and monitoring, and then try to support. So the different actors that you have seen are just going together to define the vision of development. Then together, they're challenging the polity. The polity is the structure of power that is very well, is so happy to have GDP growth. There are those who take advantage from GDP growth, especially through the exploitation of the land, through the exploitation of natural capital, through the exploitation of social capital. They don't care because they are taking advantage. Well, obviously, their narrow mind is that their well-being is just depending on income and money. But Mother Teresa of Calcutta was saying that that person is poor because he has only money. We know that money is not sufficient at all for our well-being. It's something that is telling that we are maybe losing the sense of life. And so this is really complex. So the point is that the polity needs to be challenged by the different stakeholders. And so we need to challenge those institutions. Then we need to move to the other part, which is through politics. Through politics, we have to challenge polity. And through polity, we will have different type of policies, different way of financing, how to measure development. And what we have learned is not just we are against GDP, that we can offer an alternative. And this alternative is much better. And the results that we can obtain are even more better. So to conclude, I was writing about Homo integralis that was mentioned by Becchetti, together with my colleague Guarini and Bormolini Guidalberto. So in this book, which is in Italian, so will be translated, we really are trying to reverse what is something that now we don't want to listen anymore. The Homo economicus, I think, is something that is driving us to the end of everything rather than flourishing. And the capability approach, the human development, the sustainable inclusive well-being is about flourishing. It's about making different type of policies that do not create the problem just to collect the piece of those problems that are created. If you remember, I just want to show you, that it's strange. Usually you do a premise, but this is a afterword, postfazione, for Renaissance in economics. We have several pillars also, and these pillars are those human beings that in the past have given us hope and directionality. These are mine, but I think they're well shared by us. One is St. Francis, one is Amartya Sen, one is Zamagni, and the other is Pope Francis. All of them tell us that life is something different. It is very important to have the sense of life that was mentioned also as purpose. It is important to look at equity, reciprocity, trust, and the work for common goods. So we have to translate our fear about in our hope. This is why the framework is called SPES, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mario. Hopefully next year, next to the Pope, we will see a photo of a woman. I mean, Madre Teresa or someone else. Thank you very much. We still have 20 minutes for a Q&A, and so we open up to the floor. When you raise your hand, please just state your name, where you come from. Keep it short and sweet. And if you have a question or a comment specific to a member of the panel, say so, or if it's generic. Please, the lady over there in the blue, light blue jacket. We might take a couple of questions first. Can you give it to the lady?
Can I go first?
No, I would like the lady to go first,
sorry.
if you don't mind. Ladies first.
Of course, of course.
But there were two mics going around, I've been told. Yeah. Okay, you can start, you can start. Yeah, you can start. So we have one mic. Oh, the other one is that side. Two men. You see, men are very fast when you do Q&As.
Okay.
Yes.
Whatever you want. Chair. Thank you. I'm Beena Agarwal. I'm University of Manchester and Delhi. So my question is to Enrico, but there's a general question. Hello, Enrico. You might remember we were part of the Stiglitz Commission, and now you're part of the high-level expert committee. And I want to be specific, talking about since the committee's report, I just saw it this morning, so I'm not fully familiar with it. But I want to raise some general questions vis-a-vis this, because we all end up talking about indicators. And in the bus, Bob told me that there were several hundred indicators he looked at in terms of beyond GDP, the discussions around that. And you and I were part of the Stiglitz Commission, and now you have the high-level panel. You have the SDGs. So the question is, firstly, why are we overlapping and repeating so much as if there's no history? We talk about the future, but surely there's a history of intellectual ideas and thought and indicators, and why we've continued with some and not others. A second, more specific question is on the report. So I was looking at the equity and inclusion section, and so I had 3 questions here, sub-questions, very quickly. One is that you don't look at social and political inclusion at all, which is, so why not? The second is the question of measurement. You've got one indicator for gender, which is basically average hourly earnings of men vis-a-vis as a proportion of women as a proportion of men's earnings. So since, the question is, how would you ever measure that? How would you get the average hourly earnings of anybody in a country when 70% of people in the global south are in the informal sector, many are in agriculture, they're self-employed. I mean, how do you actually get a handle on an indicator which is as vague as and broad as that? And the third is the process, because the SDGs were remarkable in bringing in civil society and intellectuals. There was a lot of debate on what matters to us. It has all the compromises of that debate, but it also has the richness of that debate. And since we keep referring to Amartya Sen, he always insisted that capability should be discussed and then evolved. Whereas this high-level panel has suddenly produced, on behalf of all of us, a set of indicators which we're just seeing, and some of us might find quite problematic. So.
Thank you very much. The next question, we had one up there and one that side. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Carmine Soprano. I'm a development economist working primarily for the World Bank, but also advising some UN agencies. And I'm a proud lecturer here at Vergata, University of Rome. I have one curiosity for Bob and then another one, primarily for Enrico, but everybody else is more than welcome to tackle it. Now, Bob, I loved your point on how to socialize all of this and how to engage with members of the general public. Because let's be honest, we are GDP addicted, not only statistically, but also in terms of how we judge government's performances and even how we shape our external constraints. Here in the EU, we have GDP-centered deficit and debt objectives. So my question to you is, what needs to be done so that in 10, 15 years from now, the next EU external constraint ratios will be well-being and deficit, or well-being at debt rather than GDP at debt? What the National Alliance that Enrico directs here in Italy is doing a fantastic job engaging with civil society. Maybe there's more that needs to be done, and I'm wondering whether there's anything specific you can point us to. And then on your end, Enrico, I'm a huge fan of the high-level report. Congratulations on putting that all together. Best of luck with the General Assembly, hopefully green light in it. I think that comes exactly at the right time as we put together the post-2030 agenda. And that comes in at a time where development is not exactly in great shape, including in terms of financial resources. This connects nicely to the prior session with Ravi. So what do you think that post-2030 aid architecture should look like in a nutshell? And of course, to what extent that can be centered on the great work that you and others have done on the high-level report? Thanks.
Thank you very much. The next question over there. Thank you. Please keep it short and sweet. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Alberto Guidi. I'm part of the Composite Center for Composite Indicator and Scoreboards at the JRC. So don't get me wrong, we love a composite indicator. It's our job to develop composite indicator. And so I understand your regrets for not having agreed on a single composite indicator to go beyond GDP. But my question is, on one side, I understand that GDP is so used because it's such a powerful communication tool. You can easily classify cluster countries. You can easily communicate. Things are going good, things are going wrong. And so I understand why a composite indicator would totally challenge the concept of the GDP. But on the other side, I question myself, and this is my question for you, how much it would make sense to have a single number capturing such a broad topic, and how difficult it would be to justify changes, even small changes, in this single number in front of countries. Thank you so much.
I think we're going to pause 1 second the questions to give a chance to our panelists to answer, and then we go for a second round, please. So I think there was a question where mainly for Enrico, but maybe the other panelists and Sandrine as well online, if you want to chip in, you're most welcome.
I will try to be extremely short. First, how do I see the post-2030 agenda? Please keep it. Don't open the Pandora box. Because in the current political game, it's very unlikely that we could achieve on something beyond okay, let's move from 2030 to 2050. I'm a little bit practical, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, but given the attitude of the United States, Russia, and the others, I would prefer to keep going instead of reopening a Pandora's box. Just on the last question, of course, there are pros and cons, you know very well, but we believe that at this point, in order to fight against GDP as in terms of narratives, we have to take some risks, is what we have done with JRC, but other members of the H-leg didn't agree at all, or at least how to do it. So it was one of the most difficult discussions we had, and we openly said that we didn't reach an agreement. On your questions first, I think that we looked at what has been done before in many respects, but we had a clear mandate. And the mandate was to select up to 20, and we went beyond 20, about 30 indicators that could be, and I'm not repeating the mandate, that very different from what we did in the Stiglitz report. One of the constraints that we had decided to follow is the availability of data. And what we flag is exactly for each indicator of the dashboard how it corresponds to SDGs in order to maximize as much as we could the overlap in order not to put an additional burden on statistical offices. Second, we clearly identified the areas, and of course gender inequality is one of them, where the lack of international data obliged us to be, let's say, very selective. One of the points that we discussed very openly was the possibility of using non-official sources. And for example, in terms of multidimensional poverty or the Gallup data and so on and so forth. Again, we had very different views. What we asked the statistical community to do is to go well beyond what we have identified as a possible basic set of indicators, to test whether in some cases there are better indicators. We consulted a lot of international organizations, so I'm not entering into the specific questions, but we tried also to justify why we chose some of the indicators and not others. But we knew that we would have, from now on, a huge list of criticisms, such as what you mentioned, but many other mentions. There is a group of well-being economics experts who even wrote to the Secretary General before issuing the report, just to push in a certain direction. And now I hope that our report anyway will discuss, will stimulate discussions on how to improve what we have proposed.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Bob, you would like to contribute as well, please.
Thank you. Just to Bina's question, we talked earlier about a study we did that looked at over 200 indicators that had been proposed and did a semantic modeling exercise just to show, well, how similar are they? And in fact, the results show that they are quite similar. So there's been all of this work and all of these experiments that seem to be, at odds with each other when in fact they actually agree quite heavily. And we actually put the H-leg system of indicators into that framework, and they score really highly in terms of being, very similar to what's already been done. different language, different, slightly different terms, but I think that's what we really need to focus on. How similar are these things, not how different are they? And can we build enough consensus, I think, to let us move forward? The second one has to do with building an aggregate indicator, and there's some work we're doing with some ongoing work we're doing with the JRC and others on how best to do that. How do you actually build a production function for well-being, for sustainable and inclusive well-being that recognizes that these components are nonlinear. They're diminishing returns. There's limiting factors. They're not simple aggregates, simple averages of the different components. So a much more sophisticated approach that I think will recognize the complexity of this situation. And also recognizing that it's not an either-or thing. It's not like you have this one aggregate indicator and you have the dashboard. The aggregate comes from the dashboard, and how that goes together, I think, is really important. And maybe one last point. Okay, I'll save that for another time then.
I'm just warning Mario to be quick, because we want to have a few more questions, but yes, please.
And I still want to come in as well. Sorry,
yes,
this
please,
is
Sandrine,
the risk of being online.
Sandrine, why don't you go ahead first, and then I'll pass it over to Mario.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there always is a risk of not being in the room. So you got to make yourself bigger online. Thank you for that. I mean, I think it's really important to bring up the points also around social and political indicators and the reality of where we are today. I mean, there is so much movement in thinking beyond GDP indicators, whether we go from the H leg all the way into the practice of some of the well-being economy governments who are really starting to put this into practice, and other governments that are starting to look at this, including Italy. There is all the work that's being done on the research side, but we also need to learn to join the dots. And if you look at some of the proposals that have come out of the G20, if you look at a proposal that myself and Enrico are part of, which is actually looking at the relationship between health, climate, and GDP, and the way in which we bring in new indicators to look at that relationship. We as a community, and this is not just about narrative building, this is about smart tactics and strategy. We have to get much better at injecting all of the research and the knowledge that we've had over the years into the reality of the 21st century and see where those acupuncture points are. And that also means that we do need to look at the 2030 agenda, because that is what's happening internationally. That is also what's been accepted in the Global South in particular, as a way and a vehicle to understand where impacts are. And that's why we've been doing some work on looking beyond the SDGs as well, and the new framework of SDGs in terms of 2030. What does that look like if we look at well-being functions, and if we start to think about new economic models? Sorry, can someone put themselves on mute? Because I don't know if that's you, Giuseppe. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Yes, okay. And then final point, there is also obviously a big movement in terms of the future, of the pact for the future, of future generations, of intergenerational dialogue. And that also needs to be integrated. So I think that many of us now are looking very much at how do we take all of this incredible work and get much more tactical in terms of the real world issues that we're confronted with, because we know this is the landing place, the counter proposal to what we're seeing from those tech bro feudalists, from neoliberal models that are actually not servicing people's lives and livelihoods, and are getting increasingly hijacked by authoritarian governments, and those governments that are not going to give us the political space to think about this work.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. Phoebe, if you can just wait 1 second, I want to give Mario the chance to respond, and then we're going around for 2 more questions. You're Phoebe, and there is a gentleman in the room, and that's it. So Mario, over to you.
Yes, I will try to be brief. Well, I think we need really a change. And the question that was posed by me by Giulia was, which are the different actors? How can we involve? The real thing is that we need to involve all actors. And this is in the academia, for sure. And we are doing this also in Renaissance, and we are doing with GRC, with Merge, with Bob. We are with Enrico, obviously, with all the people that want to do that. And losing the idea and the ego that usually is really in the academia and in the research center. We need really to collaborate, and we are collaborating now. Something unbelievable is happening in the academic part. Then the business is to be part of the change in the narrative. I'm very happy that the management group of scholars was here. Then we need to work with the civil society for collaboration narrative. That is what ASviS is doing since long. So that is the reason for changing the narrative together. Then the most difficult part are the politicians, so the involvement of civil society is fine. But the politicians are very much related to who vote them, and this is why we need really an active civil society. Somehow this change and transformation this transition needs a transformation in each of us. This is why we have rooted the change into the understanding that we need to be homo integralis, which was described in a different way of looking at human being and relating each other in terms of unity and connectedness.
Thank you very much, Mario. The gentleman in the room, and then Phoebe. Thanks.
My name is Marco Senatore. I work on European economic policy making. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is about really the new social contract. Are we sure that if we want to build a new social contract around well-being, society should only be a residual of our economic models, and we should just engage the public and not make sure that the public is actually the subject of daily change oriented by welfare indicators? Also, communication should not be an integral part of the strategy in order to transparently disclose the trade-offs between the indicators, which part of society will be more affected, and look for the agency aspect, not only the well-being aspect, because I find that politically, well-being is only sustainable as long as the people is not only engaged, but is a daily protagonist of the change, taking into account their autonomy, because at the end of the day, while GDP is self-referential and honest in replicating itself, we are not sure that in our daily economic transactions there will not be people who will be more affected by others. So I think that a new, also deliberative political theory is needed. Otherwise, this is only going to be perceived as technocratic, very important, but technocratic prescriptions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Phoebe, you can ask the question, and then we will have to wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I am happy because there is convergence. In the framework that I've shown before, the co-design with all stakeholders, including the difficult ones, policy makers, and more difficult one, politicians are there, but also the civil society, the beyond GDP is there, the sciences and the integration of the sciences is there, and this is the backbone of the global SDR. Now, in the global SDR that is coming out after the beyond GDP, we are going to fully embrace your beyond GDP report. So I would like, maybe not now, but I would like to make sure what you really love about this report, what you think is, let's say, a failure of not agreement. That is, what would be your refined optimal version of that report in order to directly integrate in the framework that I showed before in the keynote speech, which will be the global SDR framework. So this is a very sincere, practical a request to the authors of the Beyond GDP. Enrico, Sadrin. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Phoebe.
Thank you.
I will be very quick. I've been told that we can give another question, and then we wrap it up. Thank you.
Tommaso Luzzati from Pisa. When reading the Brundtland report, one discovered that sustainable development is about the essential needs of the poor. to which overriding priority should be given. This is in the definition. But then this was not the interest of transnational corporation, and maybe this is the reason why Brundtland's report was hijacked. And so transnational corporations are more powerful than states. For instance, antitrust policies have become very weak. So power was so central in the old institutional political economy school. And so my question is it now the elephant in the room in the beyond GDP debate as well? So why don't we talk about power?
Thank you very much. I'm now going back to the panel. I don't know who would like to take the answers.
Very quickly, one word for Italians. Think about the famous sentence by Quello. E mica posso fare tutto io. I cannot do everything. What I mean is that what we try to do is to provide tools to allow civil society, companies, people, and so on, to push for them. So indicators by themselves do not change the world, but you shouldn't forget that in 1944 was the US government who designed how to calculate GDP based on scholars' work and imposed this to the rest of the world. We don't want to follow this. This is the discussion at the General Assembly in the next few months. So instead of trying, but this is a plea, to see what is missing, try to push for improving it. But please, if we start discussing what is missing, it's a great way to kill the whole story.
Thank you very much. Sandrine had her hands up. Sandrine, if you're still there. Yes, please. So
yes,
you can please
absolutely.
keep it short, and because the people are pushing through the room.
Okay, well, they should come in and listen. So 2 points. One, agency. Absolutely agree. I'm here right now in Budapest. We've just gone through the whole strategic campaign of how people were given agency and the way in which they were able to bring in a completely new government. I think that it is fundamental that we start to describe this in layman's language, that actually, and this comes to the power piece as well, that people are being pulled into a direction that's going to make their lives and livelihoods worse, not better. That this, we need to hold a mirror up to what we are offering in terms of well-being economics beyond GDP. We need to make it much simpler in terms of language, but also in terms of the specific types of proposals that we're offering. This means we need to hack at a variety of different levels. At the political level, we need to bring in new policy proposals, but we also need to hack in terms of understanding that capital flows right now are trying to go completely in the opposite direction of building an economy that is not supporting the poor, that is not supporting equity, but is actually, equitable capital, but is actually supporting equity for the few. And I think this is very important. So yes, the social contract is broken, and we need to think of what that new social contract means. But as I said before, it means very clear tactics, building on the metrics, but then understanding that somehow we need to be one step ahead of a very strong concerted effort of what I call tech bro feudalism, where actually we will see more and more concentrated wealth in a few billionaires and where people will increasingly suffer. So social tension will grow, and we need to tap into that, develop agency as a counter antidote to that social tension, so that actually we are working with people in the streets. This has happened here in Budapest. We've just seen the structure of how that worked in practice. And I can promise you that we are now working to see how we can replicate that in other economies and in other political constructs to show change in different countries. And in particular, stop populism for, as I said, constraining the political space and also the fiscal space even further.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. Mario, I have some burning comments to finish.
Yes, I have a comment, and please listen to me. Well, here the last two questions were about the elephant in the room and agency. Thank you so much. Agency is the most important aspect. In the model, we have shown that there are 5 actors. These 5 actors are the human being. We are the nature, we are the business, we are in the government, we are in the civil society, and we are in the academia, I think. So this is where we have to work. We have to work on public engagement, thank you, but this engagement has to be active with agency and collective agency. There is an elephant in the room. I agree with you. Very often this elephant is due to the fact that we have an elephant inside us, which do not allow us to understand what is our future and our well-being, which doesn't make us enough connected with the nature and with all we know. And so I think these are the two major points that we have to work with, because now that the technical parts can be solved, the other parts can be solved. But how can we change if we are not able to make the people part of this process? If they do not understand that the ecology we are looking for is in favor of the poor, is not just in favor of the rich, and many other things. But we have to do knowing what different type of policies are going to create and generate, for who and why. So that is a question that is very much based on empowerment and power that is on the table. And I agree with Enrico, it's not a good moment, and this is why we need to be even more active. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. Please, final remarks from Bob, and then we wrap it.
Remarks, just on the power issue. I think overcoming the vested interests that are keeping the system, headed in the way that it's going, I think is the key problem that we're facing. And so how do we do that? And I think it's going to take a bit more than simply pointing out the problem or continuing to point out the problem in more and more detail. So it's going to take, and it may take a partial collapse of the system to open the door to allow the kinds of ideas that we've been talking about to enter. And I think that's probably happening already. We're in the middle of it. So be ready though with the new ideas, because I think that's the time when the transformation can really occur. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. A round of applause. Thank you very much, Sandrine online and Phoebe. So now we have 18 parallel sessions to choose from. They are all dotting around the building, so find your way around. And at 6:15, we gather for the bus for dinner, which will depart at 6:30. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Sandrine.